So the things that trigger us or get a reaction out of us are typically pointers to a lesson to be learned, messages. And you know what triggered me when I first saw it before I processed all of it was I was watching The Matrix, and I was so let down by the fact that when he talked to the Oracle, the way I understood it is the Oracle basically said he wasn't the one. And then he basically had to go about the whole movie with that doubt. And, ultimately it was great. He did turn out to be the one, and happily ever after he lived. But I kind of had to unpack that. So I did that just actually yesterday, kind of recently. I was like, oh, so I ran across a couple of things. And it started with this idea that in the movie Morpheus says, what she told you was for you and only for you. And she told you essentially exactly what you needed to hear. And so that was the first kind of tip. I was like, okay, so the Oracle told Neo exactly what he needed to hear. In other words, well, that's kind of odd. So that's the Oracle. The Oracle only speaks the truth. It's never wrong. The Oracle represents, divine intuition and this thing within us that is never wrong. And but even though it's never wrong, wait a minute, didn't she say that Neo wasn't the one? But then kind of balancing that with what Morpheus said, that she said exactly what he needed to hear. So there's a paradox. And usually when there's a paradox, there's like a big, deeper lesson there. So the paradox here is that the Oracle is always right and knows the future before it happens, just like our own intuition. But the Oracle also functions off of the principle that she's going to tell you exactly what you need to hear. And we'll kind of get into what I think happened. So the first thing is, acknowledging that what she told Neo kind of put Neo in a state of doubt for most of the movie. And that sort of got me like, man, because I've been there. I grew up in a high requirement religion where, the idea was that you had all of the answers, and ask and it shall be given to you, knock and it shall be open. And it's just a simple thing. Like if A, then B, there's an action, there's a reaction. If you just have faith, if you believe enough, if you ask for the thing, and then if you get some sort of a message or something like that, you can just trust it till the cows come home, because, if it came from God, God doesn't lie. But then there's a paradox there where a lot of times we are given something to basically arrive at a lesson ourselves. In other words, if Neo went to the Oracle and the Oracle said, hey, Neo, you're the one. And at that point, let's say that, and this was the case, let's say that Neo hadn't arrived at that knowledge himself. He was functioning off of Morpheus's faith in him. So he was in the same way that we function off of, we act based off of the faith of our parents a lot of the times, or the faith of some external force. Oh, they know. Oh, that's what they say. Oh, do this, they say. So we have this external knowing. We don't really know, but we're kind of trusting. And that's how we all have to start. We can't just know everything because we haven't lived everything yet. So that plays a big part in my understanding of this, was that the Oracle couldn't tell Neo that he was the one, because Neo didn't know for himself that he was the one. So she told him what he needed to hear in order to go and find out for himself. And it's kind of funny. I went back and I was like, did she actually say, what did she actually say? Okay, so I wrote this down, and at first she gets up. All right, let's have a look at you. All right, open your mouth and say ah. He says ah. That's an interesting symbol, first of all, is she could have been checking to see if he had found his own voice, his own belief in himself. And so the my last video that I did was about the significance of the voice and frequencies and vibrations and finding your own voice. So I think that this was one of those tests that the oracle was saying, have you found your own voice? Okay, then she looks at his hands and she says, okay. And she says, now I'm supposed to say, And then she says, but you already know what I'm going to tell you. Right? And Neo says, I'm not the one. So first, before this had all happened, she asked him if he believed that he was the one, and he says, honestly, I don't know. Okay, interesting. So she was kind of feeling him out, and this represents like our divine self. And, we asked ourselves, do I believe that I have this capability within me to take ownership of my own life, to face these agents, and to realize that I don't have to keep dodging bullets. When I'm ready, I won't need to. When I realize that there is no spoon, that spoon will bend. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But essentially, he says, or she says, you already know what I'm going to tell you. And he says that I'm not the one. I'm not the one. He says, like, those are the words that he says, I'm not the one. Okay, so the words that we speak reflect the beliefs that we hold. Neo didn't believe in himself yet. He hadn't found his own voice. He was living off of Morpheus's belief still at that point when he met the Oracle. And the Oracle knew that. So she responded, sorry, kid, you've got the gift, but it looks like you're waiting for something. Did she ever say that he was not the one? No. She just said, sorry, kid. He said, I'm not the one. And she said, sorry, kid, you've got the gift. As in, you've got the thing inside of you, but it looks like you're waiting on something, like you haven't found it yet. You haven't experienced the things that you need to experience in order to know that you are the one. And so I'm going to tell you what you need to hear for now, and so that you go out and you have those experiences and find out for yourself. And so next time I ask you, but you already know what I'm going to tell you, his response would be that I'm the one. Because he found out, not just by Morpheus's belief, not just by his belief, but he lived a set of circumstances that showed him that he was the one. And ultimately that builds up. It comes first by him going in and saving Morpheus miraculously. No one had ever done that before. No one had ever faced an agent like that. They had always run because they knew they couldn't win in a direct fight against the agents. So Neo went and did something that no one had ever done before, and went into the Matrix to try to save Morpheus. They were about to unplug Morpheus, and he went and he's like, no, I gotta go and try. So Trinity comes in with him. Ultimately, they're flying away in the helicopter, and the helicopter starts going down, and Neo holds on to the rope, and it turns out that Trinity catches it just the right time, and oh my gosh, all the people are, oh my gosh, he is the one. And so it's kind of building up. Does he know he's the one yet? Not necessarily, because he could just be like really cool. But those couple of things were getting him and the people around him to say, whoa, maybe this guy does have the gift, have that within him. And we all do. Of course he did. We all do. This is a story of the psyche figuring out that yes, we all have the gift inside of us. We all are the one. And do we believe that yet? Do we know that for ourselves? At this point, maybe the oracle has told you, sorry, kid, looks like you've got the gift, but it looks like you're waiting for something. And maybe you are waiting for something. So ultimately, the way that Neo finds out that he is the one is when there is a death and a rebirth. All right, so this gets into the transformation of ego in this case, but really it's an archetype of transformation generally. It's the first step in this transformation of ego is the crisis of control, where the ego basically realizes that there are things like death and chaos and divinity and all of these things that are outside of its control. And a lot of times this happens by some sort of a crisis. And at that point, in the ego recognizing that it is out of control, there is an ego death, where the individual surrenders that illusion of control. The ego is a mental construct that tries to make everything make sense. It seeks perfection. It seeks everything's got to be just right and within my control. I've got to reach out and wrangle the world to be what I need it to be, to fit what I think should happen. Hey, that shouldn't be that way, so I'm going to suffer. So then at a certain point, the chaos gets so out of control that there's no choice but to surrender. And that's sort of when the Buddha leaves that controlled environment and sees that people, what's going on with that man? Oh, he's sick. Well, what's going on with that person? Oh, that person's dead. Dead? What does that mean? And so it's this idea that the ego, after its birth and conception, needs to go through this stage of breaking down. It builds itself up in the first stages of life, and then it starts to break down. Wow, I'm going to die one day. Wow, people get sick and things seem really unfair, and I can't control everything. Things just sometimes happen that I think are so unfortunate. So there's this surrender of the ego, and that's when Neo is fighting and fighting and fighting these agents. He's standing up. He's doing things that people have never done before. But at this point, he's still dodging bullets. He hasn't been reborn. He's still fighting. Neo thinks he needs to fight until he realizes that he is the one. And then at that point, he doesn't need to dodge bullets anymore. He holds up his hand. He doesn't have to fight. And he holds up his hand and the bullets fall. And that is essentially that step of what remains after the ego death is this intuitive and unified individual that accepts the mystery that is life, that is chaotic, but also perfectly ordered and orchestrated. But it's paradoxical that way, where it will fool you into believing that this is crazy, this is out of control. Like, I've got to fight, because if I don't fight, I'm gonna die. And the ego is afraid, and so it fights out of fear. And then at a certain point, that surrender. It's interesting that what brings Neo back to life is the kiss with Trinity and Trinity's belief in him. And Trinity represents the anima. The anima is the female principle within the male psyche that acts as the bridge between, the gods and man. And it's that sort of understanding that part of ourselves. It's the Persephone. It's Hades helping Persephone to love the underworld and fall in love with Hades, the shadow side. And essentially, that's what brings Neo back to life, is that Trinity represents that that thing within ourselves that does believe in ourselves. Because the oracle told her that she would fall in love with the one. And so the oracle told her what she needed to know. And she says, it doesn't make sense that you would die because the oracle told me I would fall in love with the one and I'm in love with you. And then she kisses him and then he comes back to life. And then at that point, he has had the rebirth, and then he no longer needs to dodge bullets. Like Morpheus said, when you're ready, you won't have to. And so then you get into this as the oracle and Neo continue to talk. She says, Neo says, Morpheus, he almost had me convinced. And then the oracle says, poor Morpheus, without him we're lost. He believes in you so blindly that he's going to sacrifice his life to save yours. And this is the father death, or the essentially Morpheus's faith is what propped Neo up. And that prop, or that scaffolding, needed to go away, and Neo needed to stand on his own 2 feet in order for him to step into that self-knowing, or that going within and finding, I am the one. It was in me the whole time. Morpheus was pointing to it, but I didn't get it until Morpheus sacrificed himself, and then I realized that I was the one, and I gained my own belief in that. But you don't just start out with it. Sometimes you have to, the archetype is that you have to have that external scaffolding holding you up at first, the training wheels, before you strike out on your own and have these experiences that ultimately get you to say, oh my gosh, I was seeking on an external level to fill all these gaps and to believe in myself, to affirm myself. Other people were telling, oh yeah, good job, you're doing it. Good job, you're living up to the expectations and the roles and the obligations that society has for you. Good job. And that's the ego living and thriving and building layers. And then pretty soon that all has to go away. That scaffolding has to go away. And you've got to realize that all of the things that you're seeking in the exterior world, in the external world, they come and they go, and nothing that comes and goes is you. And the trick is to find those things within you that no one can take away and that never change. They don't come and go. So if I am going through something difficult and I reach for some external affirmation to say, everything's okay, you're going to be okay. That's okay for a certain point. At a certain point, Neo had to believe only through Morpheus's belief in him. But the whole point of the story is at one point, Neo had to find that belief in himself. Just like we, instead of finding those things on the exterior realm, we need to find those things within ourselves. And that's the gift, that we take back from the matrix and into the real world, and then we can keep that with us. And so that every time we're going through something difficult, maybe we've been through it before, and instead of turning externally, we turn internally and we say, wow, I made it through something really difficult, and I know that I'm capable of that now. Now I have that firsthand knowledge, and I believe that I'm the one. I believe in myself, and I take full ownership of my reactions to these different situations. And now I can no longer justify or blame or lean on other people, when really I can only find that within myself in a way that doesn't just come and go and depend on the weather and depend on other people's opinions. And at that point, that's freedom. That's freedom, because you're not beholden to anyone to give you the things that you need to make it through the day. And ultimately, that's escaping the matrix. That's being able to not have to fight the agents and dodge bullets, but you're ready. And so you don't have to. You're living in a place where you don't have to because you've surrendered. You know that life handles those details and you're just along for the ride. And at that point, everything is synchronistic and orchestrated. And there are still times when the oracle tells you just what you need to know because maybe you have to go into some dark area that you've never gone into within yourself, and you don't know if you can do it yet. You don't know it because you haven't lived it. And so that's sort of that continued growth and expansion, but we can only take on as much as we're ready for. And so was Neo ready to hear in that first meeting with the oracle, yeah, you're the one? I don't think so. And I think in the same way, we have to have the experience, hear just what we need to hear from the oracle, and live the experiences that get us to believe that on our own. And then we can look back and say, oh, the oracle did tell me exactly what I needed to hear. It wasn't necessarily what I wanted to hear, but it's exactly what I needed to hear. And that's an interesting paradox about life, is that we can trust our intuition, but we also need to be aware of the fact that that intuition is telling us just what we need to know. So there's a necessity to stay grounded in that and not turn to somebody else and tell them, oh, this is what I felt is right, so it's right for you too. Here's my prescription glasses. Go ahead and use these and you'll see just perfectly. And that's when you kind of get into trouble with the false prophet archetype and those types of things. And we can get into that more in other videos. But the big one here is, maybe right now you have your doubts about some intuition that you have clearly received. Like, that you know something. That the oracle told you, you're not the one, or whatever the thing is, but Morpheus still believes it, or whatever the case may be. So the lesson here is to be open to the fact that your intuition may have told you just what you needed to know for right now, and you have to keep living to discover what purpose exactly that served, because it's ultimately going to be perfect. But sometimes it takes time to reveal itself as perfection, because you're still in the game and you're still dodging bullets and you're still fighting because you're still learning just what you need to learn. So give yourself some patience, give yourself some time, let the universe unfold in a way that you're not reaching out, grabbing it, and trying to make it into what you need it to be. That's that surrender. That's trusting the process. And so that that wherever your feet take you is the right step in the right direction. And you start to trust that, and you don't doubt and look back. You just trust the steps that you're taking are ultimately going to be the right steps, because you're taking a step in faith. You don't know. We don't always have a guarantee of where that step is going to land us. Sometimes we have to step out into the dark and by faith, and so that the next step will appear, and then we take that next step and we take that next step. But ultimately, I had to realize that the reason that the oracle scene and Neo's doubt through the whole thing had triggered me was because at a certain point, I started to lose my confidence and faith in divine direction because of some hardships that I went through in my life. And I said, hey, I trusted the process. I did this, I did that. I followed all the rules. I did everything they told me to do. I believed because Morpheus believed, and now look, I lost the thing that I loved the most, or the thing that I wanted so much didn't work out like I wanted it to. And so that was kind of, learning those life experiences and kind of saying, well, that, having those doubts like Neo had. and then finding out for myself, oh my gosh, that was actually what I needed to hear, because let's say that it kept me more motivated. Let's say that the difficulty that I went through in that doubt was exactly the strength that I needed to build up to be able to go into the next step with those legs to stand on. Because at that point I was living off of vicarious faith, and I needed to develop my own. So there are supposed to be times in this perfectly orchestrated dance that we call life. There are supposed to be times, or built into this seems to be times of doubt. In the hero's journey, there's the abyss that seems to be built into the process. So as we accept that and surrender to that process and continue to trust, then we'll see over and over and over again, once those things come full circle, that the oracle did tell us exactly what we needed to hear. So I hope that helps with wherever you are in life. Talk to you next time.